It's like a pizza crunch without the batter. It's like the wood juice without the water. You'll never get the knickers I found. What a fucking chance. Premeditated patter. Premeditated patter. And that's us. We're live. So, Peter Hitchens, very, very good to see you again, my friend.
Good to see you too.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. But you're happy to see a Scottish face, huh?
Always.
I've got the flag behind me. I'm just blocking it out, though. That's the flag that Channel 4 blobbed out. The fucking bastards, man. Legend. Did you hear about that?
You have what flag you like. It's your flag now. Not Channel
man.
4.
Yeah, this flag's in Scotland, know what I mean? So if anybody's blobbing it out, it's me. But so Peter Hitchens, for anybody that doesn't know, well-known journalist, you're a columnist for the Sunday Mail. You've had a bit of a mad life as well, travelling all over the world, reporting on the front line. Recently, where we met, you appeared on Channel 4's Banged Up. We'll get into that shortly, man. But so just for maybe my listeners and my viewers that might not be too acquainted with yourself, could you just give us a brief introduction in Peter Hitchens' own words? Who is Peter Hitchens?
Okay, I'm a newspaper columnist. I write now for the London Mail on Sunday, which I've been doing now for nearly 23 years. Before that, I worked for the Daily Express, and before that, I did the standard apprenticeship, which journalists used to do on the Swindon Evening Advertiser and the Coventry Telegraph. I've done a lot of traveling. I've been to 57 countries last count. I've done a lot of specialist jobs, say actually concentrating on particular subjects, education, labor and industry, defense, diplomacy. But I ended up very much doing foreign affairs and living in Moscow from June 1990 to October 1992, and then in Washington, D.C. from September 1993 to September 1995 in the long forgotten years of Bill Clinton. And so a lot of the travel I've done has been since then, since I joined the Mail on Sunday. But my main thing I do is I write a weekly opinion column. I'm 72 years old. I'm a grandfather. I've had a long and I have to say rewarding life in journalism. And I was born and brought up in a completely different country from the one that we now live in. My father was a naval officer, and the service is always a bit old-fashioned. So I grew up really in a world very much more like the 1930s to the 1950s, but it was actually the 1950s. Mm-hmm. I hope that gives you a rough idea.
No, definitely, because I know you. I'd say I know you on a personal level, and I've only scratched the surface on the kind of life experience you've had, because as you say, you're 72. I wouldn't have guessed that, by the way. You look good for 72. I must say.
Glad you say so. You look good for 94. But
1994. Come on. That's actually a compliment. Yeah. I was 92. That was actually a compliment.
Let's get too complimentary.
Kind of be starting off on the wrong footing. But for somebody like yourself, you've clearly got a lot of life experience. As you've just said, you're probably in your more formative years. You've probably seen humanity at its best and at its worst. So could you just tell us, what was the context in your younger life? What led you into journalism? Was there any kind of experiences or moments which kind of shaped you into deciding, do you want to pursue that as a career choice?
Well, I did love newspapers from a very early age. I had wanted to follow my father into the Navy, but I found out at the age of about 10 that I had an eye defect, which would make it very difficult. So I gave that up. I used to read newspapers all the time, and I produced and edited a small family newspaper, sometimes with my brother's help and sometimes very much without it. I felt that it was a fascinating and enjoyable way of living, and probably one that didn't involve too much hard work. I've tried hard work. I've done the lifting potatoes and slinging crates in a brewery and rolling barrels and doing the bottle washer and all that stuff. And I thought, yes, okay. And I've always gone by Ronald Reagan's maxim, which was people told me when I was young that hard work never killed anybody, but I didn't want to find out if that was true or not. So journalism looked more appealing than any of that, and it's proved to be. There are bad moments, as there are in any trade, but it's a lot of fun. It's very exhilarating at its best. It's absolutely marvelous, and even at its normal, it gives you a real feeling of actually being part of things and of being an active, engaged person. It makes you think.
Definitely, because you seem like a thinking man. Especially, I can relate to see the side of the kind of manual labour side of things. Wasn't for you. I done pretty much most of my working life on building sites, and up until like the last few years, I realised building sites aren't for me. I'm more of a thinker as well. I'm more of a kind of creative, I'd say, and that's where the kind of career path I'm trying to pursue right now. But see, being a journalist, because you were a journalist for many, many years, is there any standout moments you ever experienced like in any part of the world that really stick out for you as a journalist?
Yes, a couple. Most of them really connected with my time in the Soviet Union or Russia. It was the Soviet Union when I arrived and Russia when I left. One was the morning I came out of my block of flats in Moscow, and there were tanks going down the street. And the other was the time when I actually left Russia by the back door. I decided I wasn't going to leave by the way I'd come. I went out by the back door across the Bering Strait into Alaska, which means you go across the international date line. And I left Russia on Monday morning and arrived in Alaska the previous Sunday afternoon, something I've never actually got over. And it was extraordinary, again, thought-filled. You keep on thinking about it. And I actually found myself, I remember getting to Alaska after coming through. The Soviet Union in those days was really quite squalid. It's not like, in a way, the interior of a prison. Everything, the muted colors, the dirtiness, the crumbling nature of things, the poor quality of everything you touch, the bad food. And I got to Alaska and I arrived at Sunday lunchtime, so my second Sunday lunch of that Sunday, and in a place called Fat Fred's Diner in Nome. And I caught a plane down to the main United States. You flew over Canada down to Seattle. And we went past Mount McKinley, which is catching the sunset. And then they brought a meal. It was only a fairly ordinary airline meal of the 1990s, but it included a bowl of fresh strawberries. And I suddenly found I was crying because it was just, after all that squalor and everything else, seeing these things which I'd taken as normal before I went to live in Russia, and which I now realized were for most people incredibly exotic and unattainable. I think that's what made me cry. I'm not sure. I was in a highly emotional state, having gone through several thousand miles, flying all the way across Siberia, and then coming out this extraordinary short distance between two planets.
Now, that's very interesting. Seeing that, like, yeah, when you travelled, it was a Sunday. You went into the
And
Monday.
I
Was it
got
the
the
Monday?
extra day.
Yeah, and you
I've
got the
lived
extra
that
day.
day twice, and I'm hanging on to it.
That's definitely an interesting experience. Why? See, you say you went out the back door. Why did you use that
Because
terminology?
I always try to do things differently if I possibly can. What I originally wanted to do was to walk, because the Bering Strait freezes up. And I spent some time trying to get permission to actually walk across between the far end of Siberia and Alaska, which isn't that far, but it's so full of electronic surveillance gear that they just wouldn't let me. They said, no, we can give you permission to get into the closed zone, which is the far eastern Russian border, but we cannot give you permission to walk across it. So that was the second best thing to do. But I wanted to do something different. I did not want to just get on a plane out of Moscow and arrive back in London with a sort of wet wump of wheels on the runway, and just like the end of any other journey. I wanted it to be different because I'd done something which had changed my life so completely that I wanted every single last second of it to count.
That totally
And it
makes
did.
sense.
I'm really glad I did it. I've always been pleased that I made the effort. It was quite a journey. It had other moments too, but they're probably too long and complicated to go into.
So, see, how long did you stay in Russia for?
It was 2 years and wait a minute, pretty much 2.5 years.
Right. So, what
We
was
were
your
there. We were
Sorry.
there pretty much the whole of that time. We took some holiday outside, but mostly we tried to take our holidays inside the Soviet Union, going out to Uzbekistan and Central Asia, which is actually fascinating and glorious. actually going to Samarkand, a place which I thought I'd only ever read about in storybooks or encyclopedias, and is as lovely as it sounds. That was one of our holidays, or going down to Kiev, which was then in the Soviet Union, or up to Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, or in fact, on one occasion, taking a holiday in the Crimea on the coast there. So it was. We decided we weren't going to get out too much because, apart from anything else, life there was tough. But you got used to it, and then you went back to the West, and then you got unused to it, and you came back. You had to toughen yourself up all over again. So it was simpler to stay there and have a bit of an interesting time going to places within it. Which again, we've never regretted that.
Why? See, when you say it was tough, what was tough about it?
Everything, really. I didn't really know Russian. I'd had 3 months with a superb Russian teacher who used to do MI6 people, and she was great, and she gave me all she could. But basically what I had at the end of that 3 months was an ability to make myself understood. Russian is a huge language. It's as big as English. They have lots and lots of synonyms, and they use them all. So I could tell people what I wanted, but I couldn't necessarily understand what their reply was. Also the grammar is very hard going. So the other thing was I had tried to arrange to stay with a Russian family when I got there to try and polish it up a bit, but that fell through. So I had to go straight into work with my very inadequate Russian. I had to find somewhere to live. There was nothing, by that time, there were so many Western correspondents, there were no special facilities where they would put you. I had to find somewhere, which involved spending several weeks sleeping on floors in various parts of Moscow, looking for a place to live. I got incredibly lucky in the end. I got a very privileged apartment in the block where the Soviet leadership lived, the Brezhnev family. I don't know if you remember old Leonid Brezhnev, but his family lived on the. He ran the whole Soviet Union from 1964 till about 1980 something. He was the big boss, and his flat was opposite mine in the block we were in. It was full of KGB people and all that sort of thing, and it was really quite grand. Oak parquet floors, 15-foot ceilings, chandeliers, views all across Moscow. It's great. But it took some finding, and of course, even with that, I was still living in a world quite totally different from the one that we live in. Let me tell you one small thing: maternity hospitals in Moscow. You could tell they were maternity hospitals because they all had strings hanging down from the windows, because the husbands were not allowed to visit their wives. And so what the wives would do, they'd hang out strings with bits of paper on saying, "Hi, Vladimir, this is Masha. Can you send me some cigarettes or some chocolate?" Or so the husbands would come. They'd tie their presents and their letters to the strings. The women would haul them up. They wouldn't. The hospital wouldn't let them out. When the babies were born, they were immediately wrapped up tight like loaves and seized by the nurses and taken away and then brought back for feeding. A totally different life. People live under, I suppose, probably someone growing up in the Britain of 100 years ago would have recognized it. You got bossed around a lot. Authority really was authority. Life was rough, and it was also, there was this background. You knew it. It didn't tend to affect foreigners. Moscow was quite a violent city. One of my best friends, the correspondent of the Irish Times, he married a lovely woman there who had previously been married. Her husband had just been sitting harmlessly in a cafe, and he got caught up in some gang fight and had been stabbed to death, just like that, bang.
Fuck's sake, man.
It was not for the bits of Moscow most foreigners saw. This didn't happen in, but it's a gigantic city. It's enormous, and it's quite oppressive. And in those days, also, it was very grey, brown, dirty. A patch of blue sky was a miracle. I remember once walking along a street, a particular very, very brown street, and outside a huge office block was this really fat, immensely wide woman, and she had in her hand, somehow or other, she'd found it in the building. She had in her hand a blue tit, and the colourlessness.
What? A blue tit like a bird?
Blue tit.
Right.
A bird, yeah. She had it clutched in her hand, and against the brownness and greyness and drabness of Moscow, this was a summer's day. Against all that, that little bird shone out like a jewel. It was so bright. You didn't see many brightly coloured birds or things like that. It was dreary and huge and noisy and dirty and unfriendly, because Russians only really were friendly in private. I tell this story because it's true. I used to travel around a lot in the metro. the Moscow Underground, which is magnificent and also very fast. And I tried driving in Moscow and was immediately rammed by a lorry. So I thought this isn't for me. So I took the Underground, and in the cold weather there are these huge, great, thick wooden doors which swing shut to keep the warm air in. And nobody pauses to hold them open for you if you're directly behind them. They just let them swing shut in your face. And that's an example of how much rougher it is. When the trolley bus would come up that I would take into town as well, there was no queue. There was just a melee. People would come rushing at it. The doors would flap open. Everyone would charge forward and fight their way on. Elbows. The old ladies were really tough. The grandmas, they could really give you a hard elbowing. You fight your way on. It's totally different. It's not. It just wasn't like normal suburban life in prosperous southern England that I was used to. And it was nothing could be achieved. I remember the first time I managed to buy a railway ticket to the place I wanted to go to. The feeling of total triumph at achieving this simple thing amid all the bureaucracy was huge. And I never realized how easy it was to do these things in normal life, because in Moscow it was so difficult. It wasn't just the language, it was the bureaucracy and the wholly different customs. I'll tell you another anecdote. We found, because a Russian friend told us about it, what was rather a nice restaurant in central Moscow. And she took us there, we had a good time. So we thought we'd go back. We went back with this doorman in a long coat and a hat standing outside. And he just said, "It's full." And we said, "Well, it's obviously not full. You can see over your shoulder it's not full." I had enough Russian to say, "It's full," he said. So idiotically, we went away. We didn't realize fundamental rule of Moscow: no means how much. And what he actually wanted was a 10 ruble bribe. And once that happened, you could then go inside and negotiate another bribe with the waiter to get served. It was, all these things had to be negotiated, and it's tough if you're as soft as a Southern English person undoubtedly is, and you go into this world, you have to learn, and sometimes in quite hard ways, to live a completely different way of life. And that's despite the fact that we were very privileged. We had access through hard currency to special shops where you could buy decent meat and even vegetables and fresh milk, which the Russians couldn't get. So we weren't materially badly off. It wasn't that. It was that we were cut off from a life we didn't fully understand, and which was far, far harsher than anything we'd really recognized. I think my parents, who went through the war, would probably find it easier to adapt to, because there was a sort of wartime feel to it.
Why were you in Russia in the first place? What was your reason for staying there?
Well, it was the most interesting story to be writing about. And what journalists want is to be on the front page, and not just on the front page. They want to be writing 2 or 3 pages inside about the fascinating places they are. And so this was it, everything wrapped up together, a huge amount of news. Here was this enormous, immensely powerful country with nuclear weapons, which had been frightening us to death for 50 years since Stalin. They sent people to spy on us. They had millions of troops in Germany threatening us. The place was grim and impenetrable, and it was totally unfree, and it was full of secret policemen. And here it was collapsing. Everybody could see it was collapsing, and nobody knew how far the collapse would go or how it would end. So every newspaper and every broadcasting organization that had any sense wanted somebody there. And so I started asking that it should be me, because I could see that it was the best thing that I could possibly do. And also I am myself an ex-Trotskyist, so I have a great interest in the whole Soviet thing anyway. So I thought, let's go. And I persuaded them to send me, and they sent me. And I'm tremendously, eternally grateful to the people who sent me there, because it was the biggest break I could possibly have had. If you're talking about something like Hollywood, it'd be having your really first big picture. It's huge and totally absorbing. I couldn't not have gone. I could not have tried to go, and once offered the job, I couldn't not have gone.
100%. Because see, for somebody like me, I was born in like 92, so the Soviet Union was a thing of the past. It's something I heard about, but I never really knew about it. For all my experience of it was a past life. But the likes of yourself, you've experienced that.
You were born there.
That?
You were born in Lithuania.
No, I was born in 1992.
Well, no, Sue, I thought you. Sorry, I misheard. Sorry.
No. Born in.
I was going to reminisce about Lithuania if you weren't careful.
Nah. Never made it out of Glasgow. But so for somebody like me, I've never experienced like the Soviet Union. I've heard about it, I've read about it, but like yourself, you've lived there, you've actually seen it just as it was collapsing. So it's like almost experiencing a different world, because as you say, it was a different world to what you knew at that time, and that's something a lot of people can only really learn through like history books and stuff like that.
Well, quite. And so here I am. I was actually there.
Mm-hmm. What was see, you talk about it was a violent city. You stayed there for 2 years. Was there any experiences you had that made you rethink your position? That maybe like, I want to get out of here, or any points like that that struck fear in you?
Well, yes, there was Lithuania. About I arrived in June of 1990, and in January of 91, the Lithuanians, who had had their independence taken away from them by the Soviet Union in 1939, had begun to revolt. They wanted it back. They've been very badly treated. It's a complicated story. But anyway, the feeling was they were going to declare independence. And so quite a few of us went up there thinking it was just going to be a political story. And then so suddenly we were in the middle of a press conference in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, when somebody rushed in saying the shooting up the road. And the Soviet army had opened fire on protesting crowds. And they had actually on that occasion they just shot somebody's eye out. They hadn't, I think, killed anybody. And then we went up there. I, with my heart in my boots, I didn't particularly want to go anywhere near bullets. And I saw this extraordinary thing. The demonstrations were around the press building where all the newspapers were published. And the Lithuanians had gathered on the steps of the press building. And the Soviet army, and these were soldiers actually probably from Central Asia, Uzbeks or Kazakhs, who couldn't care less about Lithuania, were called forward, and they had fixed bayonets on their guns, and they then were obviously ordered to take aim and fire into this crowd of Lithuanians on the steps. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And they opened fire. And it was at that point, a great cloud of smoke and a lot of noise, that I realized they were firing blanks. And what the Lithuanians realized at that point was that the Russians were not serious, or they thought they weren't serious. So they came down the steps, these people, respectable men and women in winter overcoats and hats, women carrying handbags, and they kicked and walloped the soldiers with complete brutality and drove them off. It's quite interesting seeing middle-aged men and women defeating a bunch of soldiers, but they thought if they won't open fire on us, then we shouldn't be afraid of them. But they were wrong, because later that night, we were all wakened from our beds by this tremendous whoop on the horizon, and we looked and there was a big red flash, and we all dashed out. And at the television tower in Vilnius, the Alpha group of the KGB, a special forces squad, had actually opened fire on the crowd and killed quite a number of people. And there were still bullets whizzing when I got there, because I remember my view when there are bullets going around, lie down. The only sensible thing to do. So I lay down on my back in the snow and interviewed the Lithuanians. I said, "Lie down, you fools." They said, No, we're not lying down. We've been lying down for 40 years. We're not going to do it anymore. And so they carried on standing up while these bullets were still. I can't remember how many people were killed that night, but quite a few. It was outrageous. But they got away with it because it was during the first Gulf War and everybody's attention was diverted. We could get it into the paper, but it wasn't anything like as big as it should have been. But that, for some weeks after that, I hated Russians. It was totally irrational, because a lot of Russians thought this was a stupid thing to do, but I just did. I'd felt quite a lot of sympathy with them before that, but I was really furious because I just thought this was unbearable. And eventually I came around to see that it wasn't as simple as that, but that changed my mind in a way.
Mm-hmm. So see, I remember you telling me a story when we were on Banged Up. I'm not too sure in the country you were in, but I think you said went out to this country, and it might have been the rebels of this country were taking over, and when you arrived there, you found you were looking for accommodation.
That's Mogadishu.
Sorry?
That's Mogadishu in Somalia.
Mogadishu, could you tell us about that story as well?
Yeah, well, it was entirely my own stupidity. I had actually gone to Israel, which was at that time completely peaceful, on an assignment to go and interview some people. And news had come that Somalia was a terrible mess. It was completely anarchic country. There was no government. And news had come that President George Bush Sr. had decided he was going to intervene and send in the Marines to straighten it out. So because I was already all that way east, I rang the office from Jerusalem and I said, "You don't want me to go to Somalia, do you?" Hoping and expecting the answer no, but just so honor would be satisfied. They said, no, not interested at all. Following day, the phone rings and there they are back again. Do you know what? Actually, we think it would be rather a good idea for you to go to Somalia. So we booked you down on a flight to Nairobi and you can get in from there. And so this ended after about 36 hours of flying about the place with me standing in a blue suit and polished shoes with a suitcase in Mogadishu at the airport, where there was no customs and no passport control, there was absolutely nothing except a bunch of kids with AK-47s asking me whether I wanted a bodyguard. And there was, unfortunately, I was with two people, one a fantastic photographer called John Downing, who recently died. He was both a great photographer and a great man. He kept me sane. And the other was a man from one of the big American news agencies. And John and I turned to him and said, "Do we need bodyguard?" And he said, "Yes, you do. If you want to go into Mogadishu without a bodyguard, you'll be dead by morning." So we hired these kids and they drove us off in their jalopy, which had no interior trim at all, just none, into Mogadishu. And we went up the main street. And all up the main street were these big pickup trucks, they call them technicals, with these guys dressed like mad rock stars with headbands and long hair and beards with these enormous heavy machine guns. And they were all lined up. And they weren't interested in us, thank heaven, because they were going. They decided, well, the Marines can come and we will leave Mogadishu and then we'll come back on our own terms, which is, of course, what they did. And then they drove off and darkness fell. And we were just John and I and these kids who were probably about 14 with their Kalashnikovs in this jalopy driving round and round looking for somewhere to spend the night. And there wasn't anywhere. And I was going crazy. I literally going crazy with fear. I thought, why am I here? What am I doing? When John spotted a pair of feet going around the corner ahead, and he recognized the feet, and they belonged to an old friend of his from Yugoslavia, who got us in to the safe house where they were, and so that a complete horror turned into an adventure after that. I didn't mean to go. I didn't want to be there, and gosh, I wanted to get out. And I advise anybody else, don't go to Mogadishu.
Still stay away from it, aye?
Even now, it's not a place I'd recommend.
Really? See, you said it was kids with the AK-47. Look, what age, roughly?
I would say 14.
14, aye, so really young
I
teenagers.
think so. Maybe spread around. Maybe some of them were 12. Maybe some of them were 15. I don't know. But they're that sort of age. The sort of person you don't want to have an AK-47.
Ah, no, of course.
But we paid them, so for as long as we carried on paying them, they were going to look after us. As soon as we ran out, of course, things would be different.
Much did you pay for a bodyguard?
I think we probably must have paid because we hung on to them. I think we must have probably paid them something like $500 by the time that our trip was over.
$500
We paid them by the day. You kept on paying them. It wasn't just one off. There was an engagement fee and then the rest. But I wasn't keeping very close accounts at the time. I'm sorry. What you do on these days is you carry bricks of cash. There's no point trying your Visa card in Mogadishu. It won't.
That's the thing as well, because as you say, like, you need to have a bodyguard or you'll not last the night. It's like you could be 2 days in, you're not going to go, oh, right, that's enough. You're thinking, I need to pay them to survive.
They saw us for the plane out. Once you're not scared for your life, it's an adventure. When you're scared for your life, you're scared for your life, and nothing else is really on your mind at all. I tell you, when I got into that place, the only place to sleep was on the hard concrete floor, and I thought, because I was exhausted, I hadn't slept for 2 nights or 2 days. I thought, oh no, another sleepless night. I lay down on the concrete floor, and the next thing I knew, it was morning. I just went straight out on a concrete floor. That's how tired. You must have been that tired, but it doesn't come to me very often.
I've probably been jet lagged as well with the long travel.
Well, actually no, because it's all down the meridian pretty much, north to south. You're still in the same time zone.
Oh, really?
It's a weird thing about Africa. You go a very long way, you stay in the same time zone.
Yeah, see, that's quite interesting. That's quite interesting. So, Peter, you're obviously a reporter. You've travelled all over the world. You've met many people from many different cultures. What would you say the biggest thing you've learned about humanity is?
Oh, uh, first of all, I think a lot of people, when they travel from advanced and rich countries, tend to look down on the places they visit. I learned how to stop doing that. People often in terrible circumstances uh, live, I think, more creditably than we do, and we should not look down on them. You find this particularly in Africa. You'll be in some terrible township of shanty buildings, and where there's an open sewer running down the middle of the street, and then out of some tiny little house will come four beautifully scrubbed and brushed little girls in perfectly washed uniforms being sent off to school by their mother. How does she do it? And actually, Africa is the most heartbreaking place. It's full of heartbreaking optimism. They all really believe that it'll turn out for the best in the end, and yet their surroundings are so grim and often violent and crime-ridden and poor that you can't believe how they can do it, but they do. It's a reproach to us. That is one thing I've definitely done. The other thing I've learned is to absolutely hate war. I never have tried to be a war correspondent. I've never sought to be, but I have sometimes blundered. And I told you earlier on about two of the occasions where I've sometimes blundered into war zones, and it's horrible. Seeing what a body looks like after a bullet's passed through it is a horrible thing, and you just think nothing. I never, for the rest of my life, want to do anything to make this more likely.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, see, having experiences like that where you have seen people literally murdered in front of you, like dead bodies, do you think it came to a point where you became desensitized to it?
Oh, yes, you do become desensitized. The thing which I remember, but I wasn't desensitized by these experiences. I'd already been desensitized by television. The first famine I saw, which was again in Somalia, I was so totally familiar with films of dying babies, bloated stomachs, flies on their faces, all that. When I saw them, I didn't feel anything like as strongly as I both wanted to and should have done. And I realized this is because I had been desensitized by television. I think television is a great desensitizer. I'll tell you the thing which television couldn't prepare you for, and which actually enabled me to feel the horror that I also felt, was the smell.
The smell?
Indescribable, horrible smell of famine.
But is that in like, places like Africa?
Yeah, that was in Somalia.
What would see you say it's a smell? How could you describe that smell?
I couldn't. It's just horrible. But the thing was, it was the one thing that was totally new to me. I'd seen it on television. I'd heard it on television. I'd heard the thin screams. I'd seen the bloated babies with the miserable refugee camps and the little tents and all the rest of it. All that I'd seen in living color on the television, but the smell of it, nothing had prepared me for, and it brought it home that I was really there, whereas just seeing it wouldn't have done that.
Because you've been on the front line and you've experienced humanity at its worst. You've seen like the bottom rung of the ladder of poverty. You've seen famine. You've seen war. Is there any moments where you saw beauty in humanity, like where in places like Africa, is there one experience that stands out?
Well, half the point about Africa, as I say, is seeing these people in conditions which we would just complain endlessly about, living their lives with amazing energy and hard work and hope for the future. That's inspiring. There's a lot of beauty. You see in the most surprising places. The physical beauty of the world is astonishing and limitless, and it's a far more beautiful planet than we think that it is. Even in most surprising places, and in North Korea, for instance, the landscape is absolutely ravishing. And landing at Pyongyang Airport late in the afternoon, and coming in through the rice fields into the city, people living very much, I think, probably as they would have lived 100 years before. The same clothes, the same, and the people astonishingly thin because they didn't have much to eat as well. So the faces hollow and full of character. I mean, this is not something to rejoice over because I think most of them would much rather be better fed than they were. But you were seeing something of immense beauty, and the peace of it, and the absence of motor cars at that stage in North Korea as well was quite astonishing. And then on the way, we were taken on a trip up country, and this was early autumn, and the wildflowers in the verges on the road, someone had obviously taken great trouble to plant these and make it look beautiful. The landscape of North Korea, a lot of it is very lovely, and it's just an example of what you weren't expecting.
Mm-hmm.
One of the loveliest places in the world, it probably doesn't exist anymore, Old Kashgar in Xinjiang in the Uyghur part of China, where the Muslim people live. An absolutely lovely old town with vineyards in the suburbs from the time of Christ, and these extraordinary bare mountains outside. And that again, you feel as if you're on another planet. And Iran, the landscape of Iran and the city of Isfahan, among the loveliest things anyone could ever clap eyes on. I wish I could go back. I can't, but I would long to do so. Lots of beauty, lots of kindness, lots of generosity, lots of hospitality, and so often in the most miserable places.
Yeah, you often find that the people that have the least have the most to give in terms of whether it
Completely.
Be,
absolutely, and beyond doubt, I've seen this in action.
So, see, you said, when did you go to North Korea?
Oh gosh, it must be about 13 years ago now, I think.
So pretty
I
recent
still
in your
remember
lifetime.
it very clearly.
So
I'm sorry, I missed it.
Sorry, I was just saying it was pretty recent in your lifetime. It was like 13 years ago. It was
Yeah,
still
well, I think I'm trying to remember the date. It all runs together, but I put all these things together in a book, all these travels, so that I'd always have a memory of them.
Mm-hmm. What was your experience of North Korea?
Well, you don't know, do you, what's going on really? Everything, so few journalists ever get in, and you're under such tight surveillance, you don't know what's really going on because they show you what they want you to see. And one thing I do think actually is undoubtedly the case, which is I think it's probably kept together, or rather kept from exploding, because a lot of people are drunk a lot of the time. I once was under inadequate supervision in part of Pyongyang, and I saw, I had one minder instead of the usual two, and I saw something going on across the road. And I said, "Let's go and look." He didn't want to go, and what it obviously was a bar, and he physically prevented me from going in. But they drink this soju, this rice spirit, which is a certain version of something very similar they drink in China. And there was a lot of it about. There were other evidences I saw. I remember once that the hotel we stayed in had about 24 floors on an island in the middle of Pyongyang, so we couldn't get off the island without being caught. And late one night, I managed to get the window open. You know, some of these hotels, the windows are quite a stroll to get out. I opened the window and looked out over Pyongyang in the moonlight. Must have been about 11 o'clock. And it was huge, but quite big city. Totally silent, no traffic noise, because hardly anybody had cars in those days. I could hear one thing. There was one man singing about a mile away, and it was perfectly clear, even though I couldn't speak a word of Korean, that he was drunk. That was the only thing I could hear in the whole of the capital city of North Korea. So I came away with the impression that was one thing that probably kept the whole place from exploding, and I'm sticking to it. I've never seen anybody else say that, but it was my very strong impression. There was a lot of it about.
Mm-hmm. It's because it's strange to hear that, because what I think the West, mine included, the opinion of North Korea is that it's a dictatorship. They are kept under lock and key, but see, when you hear about people drinking, I don't know, some part of me just imagines that it's really like a prison. Like they can't.
Well,
it's just that's my imagination. No one's ever actually kind of told me that firsthand, but it's just that kind of image. It's strange to think like people go out, they drink, they socialise. But see, when you said you had a minder, was that someone the state had put on you?
Oh yeah. Officially, they were working for travel companies, but they were under the control of the secret police, and
Right.
we felt very sorry for them because they were nice people. But if anything went wrong, then they would be in the most terrible trouble. It's one of the reasons I had thought before I went that I might make a breakaway from the party and try and get out into the city on my own. I'd managed to get hold of a reasonably good map of Pyongyang and even some what I thought was North Korean money, though I never tested it. And I was ready to go. And then I couldn't contrive it. I thought, if I can contrive this to look like an accident, I can do it. If I do it deliberately, then I'll get spoken to sharply and possibly asked to leave early. But the people who are looking after us will be in the most terrible trouble. So I couldn't bring myself to do it. In these countries, the thing you have to remember is these people have their lives to live. When you've gone, they'll still be there.
Aye.
What they really think. Though they did, on one occasion, I know they really had believed the propaganda, because we were traveling down to the border with the South, which I've now seen from both sides, and we were discussing the Korean War. And our chief minder, who spoke very good English, was completely convinced that the South had started it, which isn't true. And when we told him that this wasn't, he was genuinely physically distressed to be told this thing.
Right.
It was as if it was as if, like a British person being told that Britain had lost a war in 1940 or something. He could not believe it, and couldn't take it in.
Right, because I hear a lot of stories, and one of them I could be kind of a bit off the mark, but I hear one of the stories that the state tells the people is that North Korea wins the Olympics like every year.
I don't know.
There's a couple of mad funny stories.
No way. All I know is that there were so many places they wouldn't take us to.
Right.
They wouldn't.
Why is that though? Why is that? Did you have any idea why?
Because they haven't got authorization. It's safer to say no in these countries. And for instance, I knew that there was a bowling alley in Pyongyang.
Uh-huh.
Did you know there's a bowling alley in Pyongyang? Well, there is. And I said, can we go? And I couldn't think of any conceivable reason why we shouldn't. It would be a great evening out, and we could see North Koreans enjoy it. But they would not let us go because they hadn't got permission, and therefore it was too dangerous to say yes. So they just said no.
So see, when you say too dangerous, is that too dangerous because of what may await you in this area, or is it too dangerous because the state doesn't want you finding something?
If in a totalitarian country, a secret police country, you take a wrong decision, then you can end up in a prison camp.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not. You won't get a reprimand or even lose your. You could end up in a prison camp or dead. There's no limit to what bad things that could happen to you. So, the simplest thing to do when faced with a decision is to avoid it and choose the safe ones. The safe one was to say no, so they said no. They would have to get written permission from immensely high up to let us see the bowling alley in Pyongyang, because it had not been on our list of things to do.
Did you manage to see it?
No.
So you didn't get permission? I thought you said
no, you couldn't. They said you said no. It was.
Oh, they says no. Right, I thought you says you ended up getting permission. Right, I see. So is it?
Probably, if we got permission, it might have taken 6 months to get, and we weren't really there for 5 days.
So, as you say, it's like when you're in that country, you see what they want you to see. So, what do you think they were trying to hide?
Everything. Hunger. The conditions of the people outside Pyongyang. And Pyongyang is pretty poor by Western standards, but it's quite rich by the standards of the North Korean countryside. So, you just don't know how hungry and how miserable people are. We did get one indication of how bad things were, which is the shortage of power. We were staying, as I say, in this huge hotel, and while we were there, the lights were on and everything worked. And then we were just leaving, and one of our party had left his camera behind, and he said, I'm sorry, I've got to get my camera. So they stopped the van that we were in, and he dashed into the hotel. And it was quite a while before he came back. And when he came back, he said it had taken so long because the moment we had left the hotel, they turned all the lights off and switched the lift off. So they had to get permission to turn all these things on again so he could go up to his room and fetch his camera. The whole place was shut. And as soon as we were there, the electricity stopped.
So we're using only people in the hotel?
Complete fake. We were given shown a fake country which had electricity when really it didn't. And if ever we saw a train, we passed a lot of railway lines, although they were all electrified. The trains that we saw were diesel. So there's no electricity in the cables.
Really, I see. That's fucking insanity. The fact that
this is what poor countries are like. They can't afford power.
So see, with the likes of North Korea, do you ever see that changing? But that way, right now it's in a dictatorship, it's totalitarian. Do you ever see that changing?
Oh, it's difficult because it's not. It's now. There's nobody really has any interest in bringing it to an end.
Uh-huh.
The North Koreans desperate. This is why they keep letting off these nuclear weapons. They're desperate for the Americans to intervene. They want the Americans to intervene because they're scared of the Chinese. They think that if they rely on the Chinese will just take over North Korea, and that'll be the end. They've given up. The South Koreans saw what happened in Germany, and where reunification of East and West cost the West so much that the South Koreans are never going to do it. They're not prepared to have probably millions of North Koreans flooding southwards, starving, which is what would happen if the border came down. So they won't help. So I think the North Korean government has this fantasy that maybe the Americans could be persuaded to intervene and bail them out, and that's their only hope. I don't see any chance it'll happen. So I'm very much afraid it will continue going to the bad. I'm very sorry about it. You can see it'd be quite a simple way out if anybody had the nerve to do it, but it won't happen.
I see. It's a strange thing, man. See, because it's like that thing you go back to. It's like almost like a different planet in every way, shape, and form. And I wonder what their view is of the West and these kind of, you could say, more advanced countries. You could probably say more well-off countries. Because
no, they don't believe that we're better off than they are.
Really?
They think they know so little about what goes on here.
Right, I see. That's fascinating, man. That's fascinating. So, if I could just move on to see, you're seen as quite a controversial figure online for your opinions. Some people might view you as that. Not me personally, but I follow you on Twitter, and I always see you do get a lot of trolls. That's just Twitter for you. But is there ever been any instances where you faced backlash publicly, like in the street? Has someone ever tried to come at you or anything like that?
No, thank heaven. Generally, what happens in the street is people say nice things to me. I mean, it's not to say it won't happen, but I think people in general have more sense. The people who I think are nastiest on Twitter are probably people who are quite inadequate in normal life. They can be rude and bumptious and bullying on an electronic screen behind a cloak of anonymity. But if they actually had to do it directly to my face, I think most of them wouldn't have the nerve. I mean, there may be some. You have to bear it in mind. But I think in general, people are reluctant to do that. At the moment, I can see a world developing in which it becomes a danger. I think manners and restraint are fading away in our society, and I'm not complacent about the possibility. But at the moment, no, I don't. That hasn't been a problem.
You find that see the people that have got the most to say online, it's people fake accounts, no profile picture, a username looks like somebody scrambled the alphabet. It's always the same ones. And as you say, I probably don't deal with as many trolls as you do, but I do deal with them. But never in the street. Nobody's ever come up to me publicly or been disrespectful. It's always been respectful. And sometimes I wonder, like, is this a troll that is just sucking up my arse, so to speak? I sometimes wonder that.
It could be. Strange things happen.
Wouldn't surprise you. So let's move on to your experience in Banged Up. Firstly, tell us how it came about. What was your intentions for going on Banged Up in the first place?
Oh, it was very simple. When they asked me, I had to say yes. I'd written and said so many things about prison that when they said you have the opportunity to undergo something very as close as you could reasonably get to prison experience, I had to say yes. I would have been ashamed of myself if I hadn't said yes. So that's why it happened. They asked me, I said yes. I think they asked me quite late. I don't know who else they'd asked first, but I think quite a few other people had been asked first. I wasn't their first choice.
Oh, really? When did they ask you?
I'm sure of it.
When did they ask you? Is it?
Probably only about 3 or 4 weeks before the program.
Really? Huh?
Yeah, that's how I'm sure I wasn't their first choice.
Right, I see. Because they must have. I remember when they asked us, they got in touch. It was all done very quickly. See, like I've done stuff with television before. Like this was between me first getting contacted and me being on the show. It couldn't have been any longer than 2 months tops, and that's including them getting in touch, then doing background checks, then me going down to meet the production company in London, And then it was just a very quick process, and the turnaround for when they managed to get it out. I don't know if some part of me kind of wonders if they wanted to get it out as quickly as possible, because it could have been a seed for controversy. You've got a lot of ex-cons, you've got celebs. It's because it was such a it was like a new thing. It was an experiment.
I think they were afraid somebody else might do it first, actually.
Maybe. I'm surprised nobody has. I'm really surprised. I think there has been certain things similar, but this actual type where the celebs are mingling in.
I think they just thought, let's get on with it in case somebody beats us to the jump. That was my impression. They were very, very keen on secrecy. I wasn't allowed to talk about it to anybody.
Same. Me too, man. So, see, when you said yes and you agreed to it, what was your feelings like before you were getting into it? Were you nervous? How were you feeling?
Well, yes, because you are. But again, if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined. I'd agreed to do it. If it went in any way seriously wrong, I wouldn't have hesitated to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that they had no power to keep me there. So I thought, what's the worst that can happen? And I went through some possibilities and decided that it would be disproportionate to avoid it, and whatever was unpleasant about it would be part of the experience that I'd agreed to undergo. So what the heck? I'd done unpleasant things before. I didn't living in pretty crude conditions wasn't strange to me, because I'd seen a lot of that in Moscow, for instance.
So see somebody like yourself, because as you say, you spent time in war zones. You've been to the other end of the earth, places where murder and war are commonplace. See, how did that compare getting into this? Did this be almost relaxed to a degree, or did this have an element of danger as well?
No, as I say, I never sought to go into any danger zone. And whereas on this occasion, I'd agreed to go into conditions of discomfort where I was quite likely to meet people who wouldn't like me.
Mm-hmm.
And who could make my life a misery if they felt like it for a short time, but a short time can feel very, very long when it's miserable. So no, it wasn't really the same.
Okay. Because for me personally, when I was getting, because I've been in prison before, so I think there was that added aspect of, right, I know it's a short period, it's 10 days, but I'm going at 10 days, I need to sit in a jail, because I know what it's like. I've been there before. There's no an element of curiosity getting satisfied there. I know what I'm going back to. So for me, it was a bit, right, how is this going to go? But part of it was kind of like, right, you're going fucking back to the jail for 10 days.
That's different. That's different for you.
Mm-hmm.
Once I'd agreed to do it, I wanted it to be over and done with as soon as possible as well. I didn't want to hang around.
I suppose it was probably positive then. It was quite a quick turnaround. So tell us about what was your thoughts and feelings after your first day in there?
Oh, pretty low. I didn't, there was no way of telling how it was going to turn out. The building itself is lowest of spirit. None of the things I would normally do or enjoy were available to me. It felt quite a long time was lying ahead. It was probably actually the first day was pretty busy with new experiences. It was probably the second day that was worse, indeed worst, because that's how I realized just how
But prison is the exact opposite. There's a lot of
I
time
know.
you're just sitting in a cell doing nothing. Do you think was that a big shock for you? Did you expect to be?
No. I was expecting that.
Oh, really? I see. Was there any point you felt like leaving before you were due to leave? Did you feel like ever giving up?
Well, I think I had not really at that stage. On the last night, I thought they made a big mistake because they had us all in the gym, if you remember, and we all stepped out of character and started treating each other as if we were normal human beings again. You remember that when we
Yeah, I
were all in the
remember
gym?
that. Aye.
And I thought this is the end of term. It's over now. And then after that, they made us go through another night of it. And I have to say, if I could have got out that night, I would have done.
Yeah, because I remember that night. That was the night the party was going on. The hooch party
It
was going on
was,
next
yeah,
door.
yeah. Well, I didn't have any objection to that, but I just thought there was no point in my. I had to go to work the following day. There was no point in my having any sleep. So I was saying, just I'll come back tomorrow for the rest of it, but I want to go to a hotel tonight. But instead of being flexible at that, I got the impression that there was nobody around as well.
Yeah, because I remember you saying that. I think they all went home. I think they might have their own hooch
I
party.
don't know what they've done. All I know is that when I pressed my bell for the first time in 4 days, nothing happened for about 15 minutes, and then Tom turned up. I thought, it's lovely to see you, Tom, but it wasn't you I was thinking of when I pressed the bell. So that was a bit. That was not. That was my least favourite part of the whole thing. That last evening.
So, see, what was
I
your
think I probably
experience?
zipped my lip about most of that.
What was it like being shacked up with Tom? Because Tommy's obviously 21. He's
Oh,
very young, very hyperactive.
Tom, yeah, Tom's got a good heart, though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I no, we were never going to be close to each other. We're not the same kind of people, but he's fundamentally he's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It was my impression.
Yeah, no, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. I was just meaning more likes of what you're older, you're probably a bit more settled, whereas Tom's quite hyper.
Yeah,
Like
well, I mean, who knows? When Tom gets to 72, he'll be older as well.
yeah, I suppose he's got that to look forward to.
It's a different world. You're not quite so keen on breaking people's jaws when you're 72 as you are when you're.
maybe depends if you meet one of your throws in the
Well,
street.
you have less luck doing it, I can promise you.
So, see, was there any moments you had on Banged Up that was a standout moment where it made you kind of rethink your views on prisons or prisoners as such? Was there anything like that?
On prisoners, there was no moment. There was a long process of realizing there was a lot of good in people who initially you'd cross the street to avoid.
Mm-hmm. So was that just getting to know people? So what was it about it?
It's always people when people are just faceless figures in a crowd. Then it's very hard to work out what they like. But when you start to get to talk to people individually, it's a different thing. Everybody's much more complicated, and there's generally good in everybody. I mean, there must be exceptions to this, but there's generally good in everybody, and you discover it under those circumstances in a way you otherwise wouldn't. So that was a revelation. There's a lot of generosity and kindness going on in there, as well as I know people had been asked to put up a pretty hard front, and I know that's what they were supposed to do. But there was a lot of the other stuff as well.
Yeah, I feel that because they did ask us to give the celebrities a hard time. Some people done it. Yeah. Some people, obviously it's television, that's what they want. It was in a controlled environment anyway. There was never any danger of it becoming too serious. But for somebody like myself, that's just not the kind of person I am, and it's not the kind of person I want to broadcast on television. But when you go into that environment, you can probably relate. Let's see, when you go into a kind of environment like that, you adapt. For like us, we've kind of survived that environment. So like the brain is attuned to like that mode of survival when you go in, and it's like it's kind of like going back. And when you're in the moments, it's like it becomes like a micro society. Because you'll probably find it when you're in our countries. It's like when someone's not got, that feeling of hopelessness of being there when you go into prison. It's like everybody remembers their first day in jail because you've got nothing. It's just that kind of, it's like been out in the wilderness. So that's what you find a lot of people, there's that relatability there. Because suddenly everybody's got something in common, no matter what their background is.
Yep. No, well, that's true.
So did it change your opinion on prisons?
Nope.
No, not at all.
No, I didn't like them beforehand. I don't like them afterwards. I mean, they're unpleasant in the wrong way and for the wrong reasons. They're not really under the control the authorities. They're dangerous, and they're suicide factories.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought all that beforehand. I didn't have some crude hang them, flog them, put them on bread and water theory beforehand. I don't have it now. I think that's it's pointless being cruel to people. You can punish someone when they've done something wrong, but you don't have to insult them.
No, totally. I'm with you there. And I think as well, which a lot of people don't have that experience that you just had, because there will be a lot of people will say flog them and what have you, but until you actually experience it and you meet the people, like, people are complex, as you say. There's many situations that can go left or right, that can go pear-shaped. Don't get me wrong, there's some people that go to jail, and I'll say this, there's some people that they deserve to go to jail. And I believe if you break the law and you get caught, well, that's the roll of the dice you played. But there are some crimes where people have just had their back against the wall. And probably maybe in some situations in my life, I've maybe been the same. But there's some people you look at and it's kind of... And you look at some people's backgrounds and their upbringing, and some people almost didn't have a chance. And I'm not want to use that as an excuse.
True, but then you'll find other people who were in the same terrible circumstances who didn't commit crimes.
Yeah, no.
In the end, I think people do have control over themselves. They can decide what to do. And it's when the prisons used to be run by the prison commissioners back really before the 60s, they had their mission statement was the due punishment of responsible persons. The idea everybody is responsible for his own action. And if he breaks the law, then he gets what is due to him. And that's what's gone. That the authorities no longer believe that.
There's some element they do, though, in courts, because if you do break the law, you do, depending on your previous, depending on the situation, circumstances of the crime, you will be punished. For the most part, you will get punished, whether it might be a custodial punishment, but there will be a punishment.
I'm not sure for a lot of people that's true, actually. I mean, given the current state of the police force, an awful lot of crime is committed and isn't even investigated. No one
I see.
Prosecuted or convicted for it. And people don't see... a lot of people committing that kind of crime don't see punishment going on or deterrence happening, so they're not persuaded not to do it.
Right, I see. I suppose there is a lot of crime that maybe goes unreported, like sexual crimes. They're a massive one that don't get reported.
Well, that's another thing altogether. I'm going to have to wind up pretty soon, I'm afraid. So do you want to get a last one in?
Okay. Could I just ask you about, your opinions on drug addiction?
Well, it doesn't exist.
Okay, so how so? What is your theory for that, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I don't need to have a theory for it. If you can tell me what the word addiction means and how you establish the presence of addiction in a human body, then I'm defeated. I have nothing left to say. But there is no such proof. I know there is no such proof. There isn't even a definition for it. It's just a word that people use to pretend that people have no free will. There is no... Addiction doesn't mean anything. It is an empty word. Look it up. It doesn't. It doesn't. There's no way of establishing that someone is or is not addicted.
But what addiction could be used for? Like, it could be a terminology used to explain something, to simplify it. Because in my opinion,
it makes it more complicated.
I mean, simplify it in terms of, like, if I was to explain addiction, I would say it's where somebody experiences a loss of control, where it may become a certain substance or something. Addiction can manifest itself in certain behaviours. I would say I've got quite an addictive personality. So for me, like, before I ever took a drug, before I ever ingested a substance, I was a gym addict. I still am. I go to the gym. I'm a passion addict. If I get my teeth into something, I'm focused on it. It's all I can think about. That for me is quite a positive way.
What does it actually mean? It means you like doing these things.
Aye, for me, but
you can stop doing them. You can stop doing them if you wanted to stop doing them, but you don't want to stop doing them, so you don't. And why should you?
But these are the kind of positive aspects.
There's some things people want to do that are very harmful to them, and they should stop doing them, and they're not helped by being told they have no control. Tell someone he has no control over his own life, then you discourage him from taking the action which is necessary to put himself right. Lots of people. Probably one of the most difficult things to give up in the world is smoking cigarettes.
Right.
Incredibly hard to give up. But in my generation, there are so many people known to me who've done it
Mm-hmm.
because they decided, I'm not going to die that way. So they just stopped. And this extends. I mean, people go on about heroin now. For instance, during the Vietnam War, hundreds of thousands of American soldiers were taking heroin habitually,
Uh-huh.
and the American army knew about this, and it was very worried about what would happen when they all got back to the USA. They thought that the USA would suddenly be full of all these heroin addicts, so they arranged all kinds of outreach programs to deal with it. What they found was, in almost all cases, when these guys got back from Vietnam, they stopped taking heroin. And the interventions that they'd planned made no difference to these outcomes at all. They just stopped. They didn't want to take it anymore.
There was a good few that did end up addicted, though. There was actually
Well, there were a good few who didn't end up addicted. They carried on taking heroin. They decided they would, but the many tens of thousands of others, far more, said no thanks. I'm done with this. I'm not doing it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But
And there's a famous episode in Seattle where they had a whole load of completely inert powder circulating as heroin, and they only found out about this about 6 months afterwards. It was inert powder, but all the junkies, if I can still use that word, in Seattle were being sold this stuff and taking it in the normal fashion, and they all thought they were still getting it.
A lot of placebo.
No withdrawal symptoms because they thought they were getting it, but they weren't. So there's the physical, chemical addiction which is supposed to exist has been shown on these occasions not to do so. I leave you with these thoughts because the key. What the whole addiction argument about is not about science, because there is no science. And how are you supposed to? People say that they're addicted to sex or that they're addicted to gambling. I mean, how could you prove that there was some kind of chemical going on in somebody's head or anywhere else that was making them gamble or making them have sex? Come to that, it's ludicrous. What they're saying is, I'm not responsible for my own actions.
Uh-huh.
I can't decide when to stop. I can't decide when to start.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a denial of responsibility, and it's a denial of free will. And if people make excuses like that, what else are they going to make excuses for?
Mm-hmm. I think
Because you can be addicted to gambling, you can be addicted to stabbing people, for goodness sake, can't you?
Mm-hmm. But it can be a pattern of behaviour because, as you say, it's like if you compare it to like a mental illness as such, there's studies as such to support it. But to be honest, if somebody's telling me I'm suffering these thoughts, I'm suffering these feelings, there's no like physical ailment.
Well,
you can tell.
Don't get me started on mental illness and the use of that term. But there's a very interesting book. It's extremely easy to get hold of and read by Michael James Davis, and it's called Cracked. And it's about the whole, what's the word, the most neutral word I can use here, the whole scheme of turning normal human activities into official illnesses and then prescribing pills for them.
Right. I see. I'll need to check
But
that
read
out.
it's absolutely fascinating. It's beautifully researched and it's very straightforward, and it might change your mind about it.
Mm-hmm. About mental illness, but see, in terms of like when I go back to addiction, right? Because I know you don't believe what if saying that you're experiencing a loss of control is almost not taking responsibility for it, and I could appreciate that because some people, as you say, some people can they could become addicted to a substance, but once they go cold turkey or they get a withdrawal period, they can maybe not return back to that substance. But as you said earlier, human beings are complex. Not everybody's the same. So there can be people that, like, I've experienced like addiction, like loss of control. I remember cocaine, that was a drug I was addicted to. And I remember I would get up like in the morning. I was an everyday user, but I'd get up in the morning, no thinking about it. I'd get up, get washed, get ready and that. And then I'd be like, all right, what will I do today? What's my plan for the day? And a thought would cross my mind. Why don't you get a bit of cocaine? And the minute that thought hit my brain, it was like been possessed. That's the only way I can describe it.
Come on, but you've stopped now.
I stopped now, but the amount of times I tried to stop.
You weren't
that's
possessed. You had the will. You didn't choose to use it.
No, of course. But
We all know why people take these things, because it gives you a good feeling.
Mm-hmm. I suppose at
A
the
really
start,
great feeling in some cases, but no, that it does you a lot of harm too.
I know, of course, but see for the likes of me, like I'm in recovery, so for me, I follow a 12-step program, and I need to believe in a will greater than mine because I need to hand over my will because self-will isn't enough to keep me clean. So that's where you find a higher power in your life,
I'm
and
not going to enter into that. I'm not. I'm just not going to, because whatever works for you, I'm very keen that it works. So I'm not. I'm not going to argue with you about any of that. But I'm still sticking to my position. So we must wind up now because I've got to go. I have other things I need to do.
Okay.
So you might want to come back and try another one at some other time in the future, or if there's any one last thing you want to do, I don't want to rob you of that, but I must go after this.
No. Of course, Peter. Listen, it's I did cover quite a fair bit, man. You're a really interesting guy. I feel we've only just scratched the surface and a lot of your opinions and your life experience. So I'd be more than happy to have you back on if you fancied it, man. But I really appreciate you taking your time to sit and
No,
go through
well,
this.
honestly, I could not say no. My view of all you guys is that you did a fantastic job, and we are, as I say, in a way, blood brothers. We all went through something unpleasant together, and we'll never forget it.
That's exactly it, because that's the thing you find with prison. It's a great class leveler. Like you look at like yourself, like Neil Parish. But I stay in Govan in Scotland.
Most of that's rubbish anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, though that's the point. It's like we can come from very different like facets of society, and as you say, like people like you and Tom, you aren't the same person, but you find that like prison brings you all together because you've suddenly got something in common with everyone. You're all in prison, so you need to coexist. You need to survive, and that's why you find in like these kind of experiences you do form kind of bonds with people, because not a lot of people won't understand what you've actually went through, apart from people that's been in prison.
Well, exactly, yeah, but you do.
No, of course, and
to you, I give you my thanks for what you did.
No, thank you. No, thank you, Peter. And it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you. Just before you go, is there anything you want to promote? If there's any social media for anyone that might be watching this, if people want to find you and follow your stuff, is there any of your social media handles?
Well, my main thing on social media is what I still call Twitter, but they try to call it X, where I am. I have a bizarre handle, which is Clarke Micah, ClarkeMichah. And if you want to know why I use this handle, then you have to look up genuinely Peter Hitchens FAQs, where it's all explained. I won't try it now, but there's a reason for it.
I'll need to Google that.
That's where you can find me. Everything else follows on from that.
See, to be honest, that's a question I was actually wanting to ask you, but I'll go into an FAQ and I can check it out because it always puzzled me.
Just Google Peter Hitchens FAQs, or better than Google, actually, for me, DuckDuckGo is a better search engine for me because I'm quite hard to find on Google sometimes.
DuckDuckGo?
DuckDuckGo, it's a search engine, but they don't follow you. But also, it hasn't got certain algorithms on it. If you want to look for my stuff, DuckDuckGo is where to go.
Okay, right, no worries. I'll definitely.
I'm not making it up. It really does exist.
No, definitely. I might need a new search engine, to be honest. Google's kind of fucking pants, to be honest. But anyway, Peter, thanks very much for joining me. I hope you have a lovely night. I'll chat to you soon, mate. Right?
Okay.
You have a nice day. Right, Peter Hitchens, people, like, subscribe, and don't get wide. Catches.